Hi, my name is Pam Killeen, and welcome to my podcast, Circadian Reboot, where we discuss everything circadian. And today I'm thrilled to announce that on the show I have a doctor who is revolutionizing orthopedic medicine. Dr. Novack is a board-certified orthopedic surgeon with over 2 decades of experience in musculoskeletal health. While highly skilled in traditional orthopedic care, he is at the forefront of a new approach, educating patients on the critical role of circadian biology in bone, tendon, and ligament health. The human body functions as a semiconductor, relying on electron flow for optimal performance. Yet, modern lifestyles marked by artificial light exposure, poor sleep, sun avoidance, and environmental stressors disrupt this process, weakening structural integrity. Joint replacements are often seen as routine and highly successful procedures, but even the best outcomes hover in the mid to upper 80% range. Let's be optimistic and assume a 90% success rate. In the US, over 1.25 million joint replacements are performed each year, including hips, knees, shoulders, and others. That means that 125,000 people annually may experience complications, poor results, or ongoing pain. Those aren't small numbers. If you're the one facing surgery, a 1 in 10 chance of a disappointing outcome becomes very real. It's a sobering reminder that we need to be more thoughtful about prevention, conservative care, and realistic expectations. For patients open to it, Dr. Novack incorporates natural health strategies to support healing and long-term musculoskeletal health. By integrating circadian biology and holistic approaches into orthopedic medicine, he aims to improve patient outcomes, reduce healthcare costs and human suffering, and enhance recovery, resilience, and joint longevity. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Novack. It's such an honor to have you on the show to talk about the work that you've been doing with circadian biology and the physical body, the musculoskeletal system. You say it's the second reason why people show up at the doctors. It's a very, very common complaint, especially for people my age and even younger today, because younger people are struggling with a lot of aches and pains as well, which is something I didn't see in the 1960s or the 1970s. So you, as an orthopedic surgeon who works with a lot of trauma cases, what patterns are you seeing as a doctor?
Well, thanks so much for having me on and to talk. I've been an orthopedic surgeon in practice for about 24 years, and I do a general and trauma practice here in Phoenix, Arizona. And so I've been very lucky and fortunate, for all the complaints about healthcare and medicine that exist, it is still it's humbling every single day that people who don't know you come in and will tell you things about things that bother them that they don't feel comfortable telling their family, and you catch people at their most vulnerable with a lot of these injuries. So it's a privilege each day to take care of people, even if we all have some of our issues with the way the system works, et cetera. But what clearly seems to be happening over my 24 years in practice and really 37 years of taking care of patients is that in general, the population seems to be getting sicker, less healthy, and less happy, in spite of, in the U.S., now spending $5 trillion a year on healthcare. So that's a massive disconnect. And in the orthopedic space, we're seeing injuries that used to be seen during certain decades of life, let's say orthopedic stuff, let's say certain tendon tear injuries. So your biceps or your patella or your quadriceps or Achilles. When I trained, the test questions were straightforward. During what decade of life are you most likely to see injury X? And there was an answer. And there is no question that during my time in orthopedics, we have seen those numbers decrease in terms of age of injuries. So there's something changing that we're seeing those injuries. Plus, if we look at joint replacements, particularly knee replacements, the rate of increase in knee replacements is, and you never see it alongside the graphs of diabetes or obesity, but the rate of increase of knee replacements in the U.S. over the last 15 to 20 years is actually a higher rate of increase than you're seeing for any of those other chronic diseases, even the neurodegenerative diseases that we're seeing go crazy all over. So there is a problem out there, and I think we need to begin to come to terms with what we're doing right, and more importantly, come to terms with what we're not doing right.
How many cases are done every year with knee? And I think your areas are knee and shoulder trauma, right? How many surgeries are there every single year for, I don't know if it's those two replacements or is hip
Sure.
included in the statistics
So I
that you
think
often cite?
the main numbers, sure, yeah, the main numbers that you see are hips and knees for joint replacements. Shoulders are actually a very successful operation, and their numbers have significantly increased in the last 5-10 years. Our toys are better, and the techniques have improved, so better outcomes have led to better procedures. So those are more frequently, but we're well over 1 million in the U.S. per year now of total joints. And so when you say, well, that's not that high a number, there's 335 or 340 million people. Well, cumulatively, that's a lot. And if you look at what Wall Street's predicting, because most all the companies that make the implants are public companies, they're anticipating a massive increase in the number of joint replacements being done. And that's what they're sort of pitching to their, to the people who buy their stocks. So there's a big push to continue to do what we've been doing and do more of it. Now, some of it is because the population is getting older, but what we're seeing in real life is not so much that there are a lot of 95-year-olds getting their knee replaced. What we are seeing is a lot more people in their early 50s and sometimes even before with getting some form of replacement. And I think it's a wonderful operation. Anybody who's had a great outcome and was significantly impacted with symptoms prior, and then afterwards can get back in the tennis court, get back on the golf course, get back on the ski slopes, you name it. So it can be wonderful things. Taking care of their kids or grandkids, these are all wonderful things. But there, as I like to say, there's going to be a price to pay for this. And we need to take a step back and say, what are we doing wrong? What advice are we giving to people or what are we not doing in people's 20s, 30s, and 40s that they're ending up with these surgeries?
Exactly. They call you the surgeon without the scalpel. That's your nickname, I heard on one podcast.
Well,
So
we still do a
prevention
fair
is
amount.
really the cure.
Prevention will never prevent all of it. That's the thing. So, particularly when you look at social media, people don't get clicks or views for being nuanced. You want to be as hyperbolic as possible. But when it comes down to individual human beings and real issues, we have to realize that there is subtlety and variation, and what people's goals, needs, wants, desires, outcomes can all really vary. And as I tell my patients multiple times every day in the office, look, I still make my living doing surgery, but the best surgery is always going to be the one you've never had. And I think we, and me too, we need to continue to work and try to do a better and better job of laying out that there are other options that people can pursue, why they're worthwhile, and why that maybe shorter term discomfort, it may be worth it in the long run for them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, before we get into some of the steps that you've taken to help people overcome their aches and pains or to rehabilitate more effectively, I think it's important to talk about how and why you got involved in this area of circadian biology. I think it started with your daughter who was 21 years old and she tore her ACL, and you started asking a lot of questions and delving deeply into the subject of circadian biology.
Yes, it was really, it's come in stages, as a lot of things are, of course, and how you initially get into it. The initial moment is always a little hard to come up with, but part of it now is 5 years ago or so, when turning 50, and that same daughter and then her older sister, everyone was stuck at home during some of the COVID times, and it was just very clear that every time I didn't even notice it, but every time I got up and down from the kitchen table, I was grunting and groaning, which I now sort of am embarrassed about. And they would make comments because that's what, I tortured them growing up, so it was their job to torture me back. And and I've always been reasonably athletic and done stuff, but I just realized because I tell my patients, just because we're getting older does not mean we're meant to hurt. I think it's a really important thing because so many doctors will tell their patients, oh, your knee hurts, your shoulder hurts, your back hurts, just because you're, quote, getting old. I really think that's a cop-out. And so my personal journey, to give the real brief version, is I happened upon something and then got involved in the supplement universe of trying it. And I started taking an NR NMN supplement because somewhere I had read or heard or listened that was going to make a difference. And within 3 days, I was an entirely different human being. It was the craziest. I would never have believed it. And I don't think people would believe me when I say it. 3 days of a supplement. And this is as a guy who's as grew up and lived in as traditional a medical world as humanly possible. 3 days, and I was literally a different human being. And so then I went way down the supplement rabbit hole and suddenly was taking and spending a ridiculous amount of money on supplements, on a daily basis. And even that didn't really seem sustainable the more you looked into it. And then with my daughter's injury more recently, but it really started coming across this idea of, well, what's quantum biology? We're really missing something. And then, well, here circadian timing matters. I've sort of come down to saying life is basically all about electrons and timing, and ended up there and have made that pitch, not always totally successfully to children of mine who live in their 20s and are working and going to school and trying to have a social life. But as much as anything, torturing my poor wife, who has seen me sort of change my lifestyle and dragged her along to a certain degree with it.
Yes. And so, how do you share this with your patients? I mean, not every patient is going to be open to learning some of these steps that I know you're going to be talking a little bit more in depth on. But how do you deal with this with your patients who are coming in for surgeries or for learning about how to do therapies, for example, to manage, say, a knee problem or a shoulder problem or an elbow problem or what have you?
It's a great question, because unlike people who may show up at, let's say, a non-MD office, who often are going in either searching for or expecting or anticipating a non-traditional bit of information. Again, certainly in the U.S., if you show up at the orthopedic surgeon's office, you may not know exactly what you're going to get, but you're certainly expecting between certain buoys of what you're expecting to hear. So I agree, not every patient do I think is going to be receptive to it at all. Not every condition is receptive to it, if that makes sense. There are certain things. Look, if you come in with a certain broken bone, discussing on day one that it's important to get up and see sunrise, and to try to limit your screens at night when the person's got a broken leg or arm, I don't know that's a day one conversation. And then there are some people that you can get a feel there's just no way they're going to be receptive to it. But, you try to listen to people's stories and why they've been hurting and really why they're there. Because as I'm sure you know and have experienced, we don't always know why people are even coming to the doctor. So sometimes, you can get 10 people who come into the office because their knee hurts. And you can get the range of why they're really there. They maybe really be there is because they had a friend or family member who had a little bit of vague joint pain and then ignored it, and 8 months later were diagnosed with some horrible cancer. So their symptoms really aren't that bad, but they're looking for some kind of reassurance there's not something not bad going on. There are people who are there because they're going to lose their home or apartment or not be able to feed their kids because they happen to have a job that has them going up and down stairs all day, or they work in a warehouse. And if their knee is hurting them to where he or she can't work, their whole life is at risk. You have people who, play golf 6 days. I'm in Phoenix. There are people who play golf 9 days a week, and their knees hurting, and so they can only play golf 4 days a week. And the world for them is coming down. And I can go on and on. Then there are people who are, if you're a soccer player and then you want to be able to play. So part of our job, I think, in healthcare, that in the current environment where we're incentivized to see as many people as quickly as possible, but we still need to understand the why. And this is why we're not going to be replaced by AI anytime soon, is because trying to both intuitively and come out, ask and understand why people are there, because a lot of people don't like to admit it right away, is the first step. So understand what people are really looking for and understand what the goals are. A 90-year-old who wants to be able to maintain activities of daily living is very different than a 22-year-old who wants to snowboard. And
Now,
that's
speaking of
always,
22-year-olds,
yeah.
speaking of 22-year-olds, I myself remember when I was a child in the 60s and the 70s, it was rare to see any injuries among my peers. And now today it's rampant and seems absolutely rampant. I play tennis, and you can see even in young tennis players, even at the ATP level or the WTA level, their ankles are wrapped, their knees are wrapped, their thighs are wrapped. I mean, we didn't see this in the 60s and the 70s. And unfortunately, I'm sure you're seeing even torn, like you said, with your daughter, a torn ACL at the age of 21, unheard of, 50 years ago. What is really going on with our youth today? Why are they breaking down so much?
So conventional wisdom. So let's go with the conventional wisdom. And I will say that it's not like there's been some study that has definitively proven things 100%. And if we recognize that failure can often happen from a wide variety of loads or stressors that add up together to get us over the point. But the conventional wisdom in orthopedics is that these overuse injuries, whether it's ligament injuries, the elbow in throwers, volleyball players, to ACL injuries in soccer players, you name it, like you say, it's crazy that it's due to early single sport specialization and overuse and inadequate rest. So that's the conventional wisdom. That said, most people don't even follow that conventional wisdom to try to limit stuff because you want to get your kid on the traveling team. And so whether it's hockey or someplace else, well, if my kid isn't doing hockey seven days a week plus with a private coach, and working out with a trainer at 6 a.m. every day at the age of 9, he's never going to make it. So I do think there's an overuse component, but this is where, to get into that kind of, I'd say, circadian understanding that life is really more about physics underlying biology rather than the other way around, where it matters. Here's things we absolutely know about almost everybody, but let's look at kids today, is the kids are on screens from the earliest of ages at often lots of hours of days and night. And those screens absolutely suppress our repairability. So when you get blue screens or bright screens at night, we know it significantly suppresses melatonin. Melatonin, even though in the popular culture it's there as a big sleep aid, what it really is one of our hormones of repair at night. That's one half of the melatonin story. The other half of the story is that even the kids who are active aren't outside nearly as much as you and I were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so not getting access to natural sunlight means you're not getting infrared light, which is about 50% of the sunlight even at the height of the day. And access to infrared light is where most of our melatonin comes from in the body, because individual cells produce melatonin, and they're clearly involved in protection and repair at the individual cell level. So kids are losing on that front. So I think there's less repair on that front. And then we absolutely know that non-native electromagnetic fields. So it's always a topic of controversy, but things that come from our Wi-Fi and our Bluetooth, not to mention the power lines. We are just bathed in, it's hard to even look at all the zeros when you see the numbers published for how many millions or how many, billion times of additional radiation we're getting to compared to, let's say, our great-grandparents. Certainly since 1950, it's exploded, and since cell phones became present in the late 70s, it's exploded even more. So we know that the body can respond to electromagnetic waves. That's non-ionizing. So this isn't like UV or gamma rays or X-rays that can cause direct mutations. So we know it can have an impact, and it's a stressor. As they say, some stressors are good and some stressors are bad. Good stressors maybe is going to the gym and lifting weights or jogging a little bit further. But some stressors, or when you add a lot of stressors together, the body is unable to compensate. So the long answer is, I have no doubt that single sport matters. But what is never talked about, never discussed, for which there is no interest, because I've offered of talking to parent groups and coaches about, is this idea of keeping your kids off their phone. getting them off the blue lights at night, turning off, put your phones on airplane at night, get rid of the, turn off your Wi-Fi, all these other that are stressors, there's no interest. But I'm 1,000% certain it's absolutely a part of the picture.
Right. In the 1950s, during the Korean War, it was the U.S. Naval Medical Research Institute. They found 132 biological effects and diseases from microwave radiation. They revealed that back in 1971. And one of the top symptoms that the Navy personnel were experiencing had to do with musculoskeletal problems. There was a whole list of physical ailments that they suffered just because they were exposed to so much radiation by handling the radar. And since then, of course, you have the work of Dr. Robert O. Becker. I know you're very familiar with his work as well, and maybe you can share some insights about his research. Because, I mean, since the 1960s, 70s, and so on, we've known that there's something damaging to these invisible frequencies that are out there, but they're not natural to the human body, and so they're interfering with our own electrical circuitry. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that as well.
Sure, and just sort of at a high level anyway, Robert Becker we always take, orthopedic surgeons were an egotistical bunch, so anytime you get people who are actually orthopedic surgeons doing these things, we like we always have to point it out. We can't just say that he was a physician, but Becker was an orthopedic surgeon whose main focus was on regeneration. And he wasn't necessarily the very first one, but he did a lot of research that really demonstrated the fact that electrical currents, meaning non-ionic, as opposed to what everybody who's lived through high school biology is taught, that really everything in the cell and in the body is happening because sodium's flowing one way, potassium's flowing another, calcium's flowing in. Those are all ionic things. They're basically, if you think of it almost like the salts separate and things float around. But yes, there is that in the body, but underlying that, and incredibly importantly, there are actual true electrical currents, and that there's a DC current or direct current that exists in the body at extremely low levels that is absolutely involved with the healing process. He was looking at, his real focus was regeneration, and he did sort of happen upon this idea that, if we apply direct currents to non-healing fractures, and he was able to do it. He worked at the Veterans Administration Hospital in upstate New York for a long time, and had a couple of people with non-healing Vietnam War injuries, and was able to get things to heal. His focus was on, number one, was on regeneration more than that per se. Number two is, his question was, well, we still don't exactly know everything what's safe and what's not safe. But there were people who had worked with him who sort of took that turned it into a commercial business. And so bone stimulators for non-healing fractures are totally accepted and used every day all over the country, in fact, all over the world for healing fractures. So, but Becker also said, the electromagnetic radiation can affect tissues. And so he was involved, and as was Andrew Marino and some others, and sort of exposing that high-frequency power lines, the military putting up these large communication networks to try to communicate with submarines for all around the world, could potentially have health risks. And it was a very big deal. They had some successes, but it's hard to beat the man. And in the end, what it appears is that basically government and government-aligned entities essentially did everything they could to destroy their careers, take away their lab research, and bury any of the work that they had done as much as possible. So again, but that's not to say that there aren't thousands of papers out there. There are thousands and thousands of papers showing that non-native electromagnetic radiation can have adverse health effects. Again, we like to dwell on what the gory details are of what it does at the cell level, but for the normal person listening out there, you can use big words, but it doesn't mean much. The answer is, it's not benign. That is the simple thing people need to know.
Yeah, I always say that we can see cigarette smoke, we can smell it, we know it's really toxic. It's pretty obvious. But these
Right.
EMFs, we don't see them. Maybe we can feel them or sense them a little bit, especially for those who are hypersensitive. But because we don't really see them or smell them, taste them, what have you, we don't think that it's real. But it is extremely real. I mean, when you talk to people who are very hypersensitive to these EMFs, I mean, they're in Arizona in the desert because they have to get away from these EMFs, and they feel better when they're in the middle of nowhere in Arizona than when they come back to Toronto or London or wherever. They feel worse again. So there's a real cause and effect relationship with certain people who are very, very hypersensitive. And there's people that are marginally hypersensitive but don't know it. You know, their symptoms are very mild potentially. So there's different degrees of this type of sensitivity to these non-native EMFs. But in terms of how the body functions in the electrical circuitry, it's not as simple as saying, you know, I have a bad hip, I have a bad knee, let's just duct tape it and see if I can be a more functional human being. It's hurting us at this neurological level as well. It's incredible the number of health effects that can happen just because of these EMFs.
Right. We need to create more awareness so people can understand it. The reality is that people are not going to give up their cell phones. That's not. Education to a large degree is now done on computers. But what's been actively suppressed very effectively is that they can have any effects at all. And we need to be willing to have that conversation and then to say, okay, well, we know that the total stress load is probably what matters for most people. There are some people who are hypersensitive, but everyone would accept to say, well, you know, I can carry 6 things, but when I carry 7, if I add the 7th thing, all 7 things will fall to the ground. Like, we can conceptualize and visualize that, but that's what our body is seeing in terms of stressors. And this invisible stressor of wearing Bluetooth headphones, projecting the stuff directly into your brain 6 hours a day, like we have so many of the kids and adults that are doing, and then living with your cell phone in your pocket, zapping all of your important private parts, and never getting outside, and being bathed in just artificial LED light that doesn't have the other wavelengths that we know makes a difference, and not sleeping. You know, you start adding in all these things, and then the solution we throw at people is, here's some drugs. Changing your behavior is too much to ask of you, or changing your behavior as a parent is too much for ask for you to make your kids do because it's work and you'd have to change yourself. So now just take melatonin to sleep. And when it all falls apart, we've got a great joint replacement, so let's just replace your joint. And I think that's fundamentally flawed. I don't think we're not doing humanity a favor. And again, I always try to look through it through the lens of musculoskeletal because that's what I live with in every day. And as you mentioned at the beginning, in the U.S. anyway, people go to the doctor because they've got a cold. That's number one. And number 2 is because something hurts. And when you have something there's like 18 billion doctor visits in the U.S. per year, something insane. So there's an enormous amount of time, energy, money spent for people who are hurting. And some of it is technology related, meaning all these screens that we stare at all day long. Some of it's going to be the non-native EMFs. Some of it, there's a lot of things that contribute to it. But and then, frankly, because the system within which we do healthcare can be as important as the care we give, we have a culture in a society that unfortunately has moved away from personal responsibility in many cases to having things on every front be somebody else's fault. And so when you don't feel like you have control, or you're brought up to believe that any of your own issues are somebody else's fault, it doesn't create an environment where we can have healthy people. We need to make so there's lots of fronts to go at it. And again, we can talk as detailed from any individual problem you'd like. I'm so happy to, but I tend to spend a lot of time at the high level because I think a lot of the times we're on, like you said at the beginning, how do you initiate the conversation? We're not even on the same plane as the people we're talking to, and we have to level set with how we even have a worldview before we can get to the details.
Because a lot of people just simply feel helpless, and it's learned helplessness through the centralized medical system that we have right now. And you're alluding to the decentralization of healthcare. I just want to share what happened with me before the lockdowns. My parents were getting elderly and frail, and I had promised them that I would help them to the end. And you can see behind me, I have the stair lift here. So I took care of my parents in the family home, and it was really tough on me in terms of my sleep, because I've always had to be really careful with my sleep. And so by default, I've become, a sleep coach just because I'm so passionate about the importance of sleep. And I know that my listeners know how circadian biology actually ties into high quality sleep. But what happened is when I was taking care of my parents, it really messed up my sleep because, during the middle of the night, I'd hear them calling out to me, help with this, help with that, or there'd be a fall and I'd have to call an ambulance, and it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was on pins and needles for years while I was taking care of my parents before they passed away. And I could feel my body, like a knee problem, shoulder problem, whatever. I could feel the degeneration occurring. And so I know that there's a big connection between circadian health, good quality sleep, and the musculoskeletal system. So I can't urge people enough, I can't say this often enough, that we have to have good quality sleep if we expect to be healthy at a physical, mental, emotional level. And unfortunately, people today don't understand the importance of sleep. They don't prioritize sleep. They think sleep is for the weak. But I'm sure you see this with your patients, that some of them who are breaking down the most are probably sleep deprived.
I think I often ask about sleep disruption in association with the problems that they're there for. We know what the literature says, as you say as well, is that people are sleeping less well, and teenagers are sleeping less well than they ever have before. We were both there. We liked our sleep, but we weren't on screens until 11:30 every night. After spending 3 hours doing homework on screens, after being on our phone on and off all day, after the first thing we see when we wake up in the morning is a blue screen. And so I think that's definitely contributed. We have 3 dogs in our house. I think they sleep 20 hours a day. Humans have evolved to sleep much less. But we know that rest period is essential for life. I know there's this, some people believe that, the natural state of life is actually asleep and not awake, from a consciousness perspective. So we need to compress all of our recovery and healing. And I think that's one of the things that Becker showed as well, is that the DC current in the brain can change direction during sleep. So real things happen at the most fundamental level of physics in the body during sleep. And all those things matter, even if we don't fully understand how. So when we deprioritize sleep, when we don't set up the environment around sleeping to maximize the benefit for it, it becomes a continuous stressor every single day. So, if you constantly are plugging a knife through your gas tank so that it can never get filled back up, because once it goes above a certain level, it's dripping out again, it's no wonder that when you then add in your non-native EMFs, when you add in, obviously we haven't even touched on the food supply, when you add in horrible food that we're subjected to for a whole variety of reasons. When you add in all of these things, the fact that people are just more anxious and more stressed, some of it's cause, some of it's probably effect of the other things, that overall stress load makes it more and more likely that we're going to break down in different ways. And what do we see that in real life is, if you look at overall anxiety and mental health issues amongst young people and adults, you can look at the suicide levels in 40s and 50-year-olds, men and women. Yes, maybe we're living longer, although post-COVID, I'm not convinced that we are, if you look at the total numbers. But we want to be living healthy, full lives. And that involves, unfortunately, because none of us like making changes, making tough choices in an environment where we're being constantly scrolling or having flashed in our face, or being told that there's some easy way out to make money, feel better, meet people, etc. You have to do the hard work of living.
Yeah. But the thing is that the steps that you're going to be talking about are actually quite easy to implement. People just
Yes.
have to have the right mindset to empower themselves in order to get well, in order to embrace a lot of these steps. So maybe what you can do now is just highlight some of the steps that you tell your patients about and the results that you're seeing after they start doing these things.
Absolutely. So here's the basics that I tell people. Maybe a good example is, let's say, post-operatively, because what can we do to maximize post-operatively? Number one is, let's just talk the basic range of circadian living. If circadian is 24 hours, obviously we have cycles that are seasonal. We have cycles that are 24 hours. We have cycles that are less than 24 hours. We have monthly cycles. All these things can matter. And so here's what I tell people: be outside without sunscreen or sunglasses for the first 30 minutes after sunrise every single day. That literally turns on everything in your body to start functioning properly throughout the day. Forget any analogy, because none will do it justice. It's as simple as this. When the sun comes up, be outside. That simple. If you can, and you have a living environment that allows it, be outside with your bare feet on the grass. Grounding's probably a bit beyond our conversation here, but the reality is we do interact with the earth. We run on electrons, and there's a reason why our palms and feet sweat, because it makes it a better conductor, so we can actually absorb electrons. So why you feel in many cases, you feel so incredibly good when you go in the ocean, and all that big salt water there. We can actually absorb some of that stuff in. So get up for sunrise. That's number one. Number two is, we live in a world that's panicked about the sun. If you look at Arizona, all the policies, and I think everyone gets taught in school how horrible the sun is, don't ever get a sunburn, et cetera. But we need UV light for a whole variety of reasons. UV light creates vitamin D, which is a gazillion times better than ever taking vitamin D supplements. It's involved in helping break up a thing called POMC, which has a lot of different components to it. That's great on a lot of fronts. When people were worried about their eating habits, if you've ever realized why you don't feel quite so hungry on a bright, warm, sunny day when you're outside, it's in part because one of the products that UV light does when it breaks up POMC into its components, actually helps suppress appetite. So there's something about that. So try to get daylight sun as well. If you can, do the same thing that you did in the morning for the evening to try to see a sunrise. And at night, minimize your screens if you can, so that you're not getting pummeled with 65-inch bright blue Netflix light until 11 o'clock every night. A hard sell, take your television out of the bedroom, put it in a different room so it's not a temptation to be there. Keep your phone out of your bedroom at night if you can. Try to, if you have, put it on airplane mode. So to reduce, that's I think the simplest thing. We know that exposure to infrared light after eating significantly reduces blood glucose levels. So from a metabolic perspective, this whole idea of have a meal and then go out for a walk, basically every piece of advice our grandmothers told us is better than 99% of the actual medical advice today that people pay copays for.
Listen, in the 1960s, women were outside in the freezing cold, walking their children, making sure they were exposed to fresh air and sunshine. They had no qualms about it. Now, today, when I talk to people, even in their 20s, I mean, we have had a really long, cold winter here in London, Ontario. And I have people in my life who just will not go outside and be exposed to the cold. So they've been indoors all winter, and they can't understand why they're getting sick. It's not a contagion. It's just that they're not outside in the fresh air and the sunshine. But we took our babies, newborn infants, outside without any fear in the 1960s. And then all of a sudden, now it's like, oh, we're going to keep away from the dreaded outdoors and the sunshine.
Our body needs all of those cues, and those are the seasonal cues, which is, that overall sun exposure is meant to be accompanied with temperature exposure. So we're meant to get cold, which is why cold plunging, and I've got one sitting over there in the backyard that I'll use a few days a week or so, because exposing the body intentionally to cold has a lot of benefits, not the least of which are the actual metabolic and other effects of actually stimulating the body for it.
Now
That's the
you don't
food issue.
necessarily encourage everybody to do the cold plunge. They don't have to go that far per se. I mean, it's maybe cold hot showers is something
No,
more
well,
simple maybe.
if you're up in your neck of the woods, like you say, just try to get outside. If you're, you know, the idea of letting your body get cold in the winter, I do think matters. You know, the most efficient way to get your body cold is to get into a cold body of water, because that's the most efficient way to sort of lower your skin temperature. And there's lots of schools of thought on cold plunge, and I won't consider myself an expert in every facet of it, but you know, while it's popular to get into 33-degree water with a big chunk of ice floating across the top for a few minutes, I know that Jack Cruz and other people have made this strong case that this idea of getting cold isn't necessarily trying to lower your core temperature significantly and dangerously. It's the idea of getting exposure to your skin and sub-Q fat, and that direct stimulation. That's the perception of that cold and the chilling of the superficial layers without necessarily lowering core body temperature significantly, which can be dangerous, and also not an area of my expertise, but depending on, for women in different parts of their cycle or maybe trying to get pregnant, where the massive stress of getting into 33-degree water can have adverse effects. But the idea of getting cooler has benefits, and like you say, we all live in, you know, if it's not between 68 and 72, we feel like the world's going to end, and I can't say that I'm always not guilty of feeling that way. So you know, so that kind of seasonal thing. So that's but that basic 24-hour, that's my advice on that front.
And you talk a lot about your solar callus, that you were a bit dubious at first and you gradually built up your solar callus with regards to, I mean, we're talking about cold thermogenesis now, but let's flip over to the solar
Yes.
callus and the importance of actually building your tolerance to the sun, because so many millions of people have been afraid of the sun. So in order to overcome that
Oh,
fear,
yeah, I never tanned in my whole life. And uh, as a doctor, you see a lot of people with lots of different problems. And there's no way you can have had every experience of every patient that's possibly going to have. So, you know, we can empathize, or you can sympathize, but I can't say that I've experienced every health problem that I'm going to treat or take care of, right? So, but part of going down these new paths is before you can recommend things to other people, because it's the opposite of what we've been taught, I figured, okay, well, I have to try it on myself first. And so I've never tanned. I would always burn as a kid. I have this pathological despising of having a skin burn, so I avoided the sun completely. Or you know, and I hated the goopy the sunscreens of the 60s and 70s and 80s was the most uncomfortable, sticky, gross, greasy thing. So I just avoided the sun completely. But now that you've got the whole alcohol-based stuff you could spray on, I would just literally coat myself in 50 and be outside. So I started in the wintertime, which in Arizona can still be sunny, although with a lot less UV. And I started doing exactly what all of the solar callus, or sort of building up a exposure to it. And yeah, I got to where I could be outside in the 110 degree UV gazillion, you know, index in the middle of the day here in Arizona. And I was tan and didn't get a single sunburn. And that was unbelievably life-changing for me, because no one had ever said that was going to be even possible.
yeah, and I'm
So,
fair. I'm fair. I'm blonde and I rarely burn. I'd have to be pretty silly to go out and cause a burn. I build my solar callus every spring and just
yep.
slowly build up my tolerance to the sun. And I can't even remember the last time I burned. I just don't burn. Of course, I don't eat a lot of seed oils, and so that helps as well. I'm a big
Right.
proponent of the work of Dr. Weston A. Price, so I got over my animal fat phobia years and years ago. So I'm sure that helps protect my cell membrane as well.
Yeah. So I think that matters, because another thing that isn't appreciated, I think, in the medical community, or accepted in the medical community, is we all know we see with our eyes, and we all know that we can see the different colors, or most people can. Even if you're colorblind, you're still seeing different wavelengths with colors. But the idea that we have receptors all throughout the body, including in the eye, they're designed to identify, process, and utilize wavelengths that we cannot see, again, people look at you like you're a total nut job when you say these things. But it's been increasingly proven. It's totally accepted, of course, that there are non-visual photoreceptors in the eye, meaning they receive the wavelengths, but we know they're not connected directly to the parts that make us be able to see each other right now or see the tree behind me. But the reality is that we have actual receptors that are designed to collect different wavelengths. We know that a lot of things within cells absorb electromagnetic waves that are, and then seem to be able to turn those into something else. All of that is physics and not the biology that I spent my whole life studying. I like to say orthopedics is basically, Newton's physics at best. It's basically playground physics applied to the human body, right? You wreck your motorcycle, where does the force come in and where does it come out? You're playing tennis, you swing the racket, something hurts, well, it's just basically for that. So the idea that people have to have at least a passing understanding quantum mechanics or quantum electrodynamics is, I'd say, for the most part, beyond me. But to have a passing understanding that it exists and what it implies, which I think is all most of us mere mortals can ever ask to be able to do for these topics, it should be day one in medical school. And I did listen to an interview recently that Andrew Marino gave. I think he was with Cameron Borg over on the Reach Your Flow podcast. And this idea that, there's not a biochemist today that studied physics. There's not a medical student that's being taught in medical school the role of physics or quantum mechanics and how it might relate to the human body. So we have 2-3 generations of people where once you realize that it's not there, you start looking and you can't help but wonder if it's not an intentional black hole. It's so absent that suddenly its absence is noticeable.
Well, if you listen to Jack Kruse and you look back at what happened to Robert O. Becker in the 1970s, they knew that they were opening up the technological world and that they were going to be unleashing a lot of these EMFs on us. And so they didn't really want us to know about the health implications of being surrounded by this stuff. So yeah, I call it a conspiracy, call it an error by omission, whatever you want to call it. Unfortunately for them, people are learning about these effects, and we've had activists here in Canada talking to Health Canada about this, and they tend to turn a blind eye to it. But they are being confronted, the government has been confronted, but the lobbyists seem to be winning out, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, I think at least people are beginning to understand, to hear about it. Whereas I think it was the 0.0000001%. Maybe we've moved up a decimal point or two since then, and I'm hoping we're going to start making some progress because I do think it's going to be. People tend to hear the extremes, which is, well, the radiation that you're putting directly into your brain when you wear your Bluetooth headphones, the radiation you get by storing your cell phone in your pocket or in your Lululemon pants or your, top, maybe isn't the greatest for your health. People hear that and they think they're being told, we want to take away all cell phones. Because it's easy for the people who want to either demonize or discredit the people who raise concerns as taking it to an extreme. But the reality is what we want, what I want, is to make people aware that they're not totally benign. Here's information, and then you make choices. As Marino said recently too, and I agree, we're not taking away people's cigarettes. But the world is a better place knowing that smoking is not the healthiest thing you can do for people. You're going to make that choice. What we've done in the last 30 years in this country, and I agree with you, that there's a range of how much is it commercial interest versus conspiracy theory versus inertia versus, oh my God, if it comes out now, we're all going to get sued into oblivion. Because to something more nefarious even. But we want to give parents, I mean, I feel badly. I mean, look, my kids are 22 and almost 25. So they grew up, we did not have cell phones. And honestly, we were the family that resisted putting any kind of a DVD player in the car.
Yeah.
And so we were our kids when they were little didn't have some of these things, and we forced them into the backyard all day long. But I think if parents were given information, people would start making choices.
So you resisted the technological
Yeah,
change
so
to a certain extent.
we resisted it, but today I think the biggest issue for families is they don't know that it's potentially an issue. And like a lot of changes that can happen, they're going to start at certain socioeconomic levels. But my take is, I think if I was a family moving in now and moving into a new home and maybe doing some renovations before I moved into a new home, I'll be looking to engaging somebody who had expertise in how can I do sort of Wi-Fi, or what kind of mitigation can I do in the house so that maybe I reduce that total load for my kids. What can I do? I mean, we installed a kill switch in our house so that when we go to bed here, I push a little key fob and it turns off the power to our side of the house.
Yeah. Well, you can
And
go
we did the
wired.
test.
You can go wired as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that way, because we determined it was coming from our TV, it was coming from the router, it was coming from everything, which happens to live on the other side of the wall where the head of our bed is. So but parents don't have information, or people don't have information. So that's my hope going forward, and so that we give people choices, and then we're going to have to see, because the reality is that it's very hard to draw a line to tell a parent the reason why your daughter might be more likely to have an ACL tear at age 12 playing traveling soccer is because they have a cell phone and you have, quadruple gigabit X, Wi-Fi and routers all over your home.
It is hard for
You
people
know,
to believe that we are semiconductors, that our bones are semiconductors, and the fascia is all running on this electrical energy. I remember a biologist I know, she was talking about holding on to the end of a fluorescent light, and it would turn on just by holding on to it. So it's a sign that we're electrical, essentially. We're electrical beings. If we impair that electrical signaling that goes on in our bones and our structure in general, things are just going to go into a state of disrepair.
right. We've been living for a long time under the concept, and science and biology and medicine has lived under the concept of really systems biology, right? You're going to go to your GI doctor, you're going to go to your orthopedic surgeon, you're going to go to your cardiologist, you're going to go to your neurologist, and everyone's different. The reality that I firmly believe now, that people over the years have tried to point out, is that the body really does function as an entire unit. And that comes and includes the concept of energy, which is this idea that the body can ultimately look for electrons, because that's what runs through the electron transport chain. Some of it's food, but it can also steal from other places. It will look for sources of energy to then be able to use to control, number one, the most important functions in the body, which should be our heart and our brain. And it turns out that the musculoskeletal system, for which the number one thing is going to be collagen, and collagen is by far the most common protein in the body, which is a triple helix. Basically, it's three proteins all wrapped around together. It is an incredible source of electrons. So when you can unzip collagen, you are freeing up electrons for usage around the body. Now, that wouldn't even just be heresy if you said that at an orthopedic conference. People would walk out before you got out halfway through because they just wouldn't believe it could possibly be true. So this idea that sarcopenia, or the idea that when we get older we lose muscle mass, that then results in, as you can't get up and down stairs, you can't take care of yourself, you can't go to the grocery store, all these basic daily living things. That osteoporosis or osteopenia, which is a loss of the density of the bones, which creates a risk factor for fracture and the subsequent disability and death, that what if in the majority of cases, or significant majority of cases, that ultimately sarcopenia and osteoporosis are because there's a fundamental energy problem in the body. Either there's an energy deficit, or there's an energy efficiency problem, meaning we need 10 units to make the thing run, and we only have 7, so we got to take it from someplace else from the bank, and muscles and bones are actually a great bank of those units. Or it turns out that the engine's very, very inefficient, so in order to get a net of 10 units, our units don't work so well, so we actually need to do 15 units. So that's a lot of that energy inefficiency of our mitochondria not working well over time, and that can be for a gazillion reasons beyond the conversation here. And so when we have energy inefficiency, we also need to steal because we've got to burn stuff at a faster rate. So that may not turn out to be 100% true. My bet is it's mostly true in most cases. And then imagine what the really smart people could do with that if, as opposed to the $300 billion we wasted in US spending on research about amyloid as the cause for Alzheimer's, when it was based on a fraudulent study from 2006. And we've spent $300 billion in direct funds. Forget the opportunity cost of money we didn't spend on other ideas, or the people whose other ideas were banished or lost their academic credentials because they couldn't get any research money for it. So imagine if we spent some fraction of our resources trying to understand that better and saying, what are the electrical causes? What can we do differently? Maybe, I hold out hope that there may be maybe we can start spending money in the right place for that stuff. So, but we look at the body totally differently when we realize it really functions as a unit.
Exactly.
And the musculoskeletal system is an essential, but also very rich bank of the building blocks and bits we need to function. So I think that the solution is giving people information. I just want to add one other thing in terms of what I tell patients all the time now. By the way, not always to good effect, which I can give a brief story for. So all of the circadian stuff I do think is remarkable. And I do think it is a long-term plan. It's a long-term plan to sustain and maintain health. It is an adjunct for things like injuries and healing, because we know, for example, that full spectrum sunlight is associated with less post-operative narcotic usage, in part possibly because of the endorphin release from getting exposure to sunlight. So there are benefits short run. But for many, many, many people, not everybody, going to a ultra low carb or carnivore diet for some period of time is the most anti-inflammatory thing people can ever do. Without question. Better than supplements, infinitely better and safer than taking Advil and Aleve. I'm 1,000% certain. Not just because you can see thousands of testimonials online, but on the cases where I can convince patients to do it, they usually come back and are angry because it's worked, because they had to give up what they like. But we can talk about or not why that's the case. The easy version is insulin is pro-inflammatory throughout the body. It just is what it is. That's number one. Whereas ketones, so if you're ketogenic, beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is one of the ketones that produce in ketosis, directly seems to stimulate an anti-inflammatory or an antioxidant pathway. Lowering overall lowering overall sugar levels in the blood can be anti-inflammatory, making our mitochondria work more efficiently because you get so much more energy per unit with fats than you do with sugars. All of these things then come into play with how you produce your water in the body, and hydration is essential for joints to move. When we do these viscosupplementation or gel shots in the knee, hyaluronic acid is really just sucking up water. That's why it's in every shampoo, and every dermatologist loves it so much, because it makes things plump up. But when we do it in the knee, we don't really fully understand how it works, but we know one of its effects is that because it hangs onto so much water, that probably has an impact on the overall function. Right. And again, that doesn't even get into the complexity of what does water really do. Mm-hmm. Again, maybe a bit beyond here. So I tell people, bringing it all around, for my adults, I always say, try the circadian thing for 30 days. I don't, just try it. If you're hurting, for some of the simple orthopedic stuff, I really do, where people aren't chronically ill, I think people will see symptoms within a week to 2 weeks. Really, things stop hurting. And they say, do I need to do it for life? And I say no, but if you do it for 60 or 90 days and everything feels perfect, well, then you can decide what you want to do. And then if you feel badly, you can make your choice. But don't believe that nothing can be done. Anatomy is not destiny. That's another thing I tell people all day long. Just because you have an x-ray that looks crappy, and many people do, doesn't mean you have to have significant symptoms. Anatomy is a very inexact correlate with symptoms that people have, which is another thing that people cannot get their brain around. My x-ray's abnormal, my MRI's abnormal. I need an operation. I need to fix it. We really don't have ways to fix stuff. Let's come out and admit it. And I don't care if you're going to spend money on platelet-rich plasma, which is PRP, or go out and spend $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 at one of these clinics that are on all the podcasts pitching stem cells. I'm not saying you can't get benefit, but we're not really regrowing stuff in the vast majority of cases. It seems to be modifying at a different level.
Right.
A little rambling a bit, but it sort of, I think, gets to the question, is that I think we start with the basics for people. But when you show up at the orthopedic surgeon's office, you're not expecting to hear it. And that's a challenge for me because it comes so far to left field. I do have occasional patients that react angrily to it because they see an abnormality. I don't think the abnormality is really the cause of their symptoms or likely to be, so I don't think a surgical procedure is the right thing to do. I make some overall lifestyle suggestions, say at least try it for 60 or 90 days. I will occasionally get, as I did the other day, a really angry reply. I already tried to do X. I already eat a lot of protein. And then they go and then they fill out their review and they will say, you know, Dr. Novack's a horrible doctor. He recommended I do X. He didn't care about me. He didn't pay any attention to my MRI findings. I went to another doctor who signed me up for surgery. I'd never go back to that Dr. Novack again. That literally happened within the last 10 days.
Well, we'll see this all the time here in Ontario because of socialized medicine. People, they just want to go in, quick solution, duct tape, anything else beyond that, they just can't conceptualize. But I do predict, though, that in the next year, the word circadian is going to be much more popular because of the work that you're doing, the work that Dr. Jack Cruz is doing, and so many others. I think that it's only going to grow in interest, and people will catch up. It's just going to take some time.
I hope so. Again, my platform is this little teeny tiny thing, and so I don't have any delusions of grandeur in terms of scope or the innovative synthesis and innovative thinking that people like Jack Cruz has done, and so I'm just this lowly orthopedic surgeon here in Phoenix trying to do a little bit. But my hope is that it's the same thing. We talk to one person and another person, and then podcasts like yours who have a great audience of people. We want people to feel like there's hope and options, that they're not alone, that there are avenues that smart people in the future will hopefully have the opportunity to work on so we do learn more, and that those things won't be suppressed for whatever reasons they're being suppressed today, so that we give ourselves and our kids and our grandkids and the people we've never met across the world the best opportunity to have healthy, fulfilling, independent, free lives, and that's the grand plan.
Yeah.
Even if we're down to saying, hey, my knee hurts and I can't play tennis this weekend and my life is horrible as a result, which is what a lot of us are at the victim of all the time.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do. Before we finish up here, because I have to go play tennis, maybe you can just give us a quick summary of what your perfect circadian day would look like.
Sure. So as I say, I like the fact that you try to turn off as many of your electromagnetic things for the night before when you're going to sleep. To try to be in bed early. There really is a big difference if you can get into bed by 9:30 or so and be asleep to get a full night's sleep. And then get up. I do think it's important to get up, get outside, get your feet in the grass, watch the sunrise, have your cup of coffee if that's what it's going to be, as I do. And then my routine now, when I have the opportunity, is if it's a super sunny day, even here, I won't always do it, but I've got a big fancy red light panel that I'll do. And then I'll hop in the cold plunge for a few minutes or so, take the dog for a nice walk around the neighborhood, go to the gym, because of course we didn't spend any time really talking about working out or that, weightlifting or resistance exercise, which can be a topic for another time, and I think is incredibly important for musculoskeletal health span. Workout, do some work is always a good thing. Not on trauma call today, but I will be on again tomorrow. And then I'll try to have high protein throughout the day. Try to do my 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein per day. I minimize my carbs, but not crazy about it at this particular moment in my life.
You don't eat at dark. You never eat when it's dark out. I heard you say that as well.
I try not to, but the reality is that we have to live in the real world. I try to do it I try to stop eating as early as I can. And then I'm extremely fortunate. I have been happily married for 27 years, and my wife works, she's an OBGYN. And so when she comes home in the evening, we try to spend some time together, because that connection, which is also missing in so many places in the world today, is having human connections with other people in person, not just online. We are evolutionary designed to connect to other people, and we need to push that. I could talk about breathing exercises, which are important, and some brief meditation, and I think there's a lot of gratitude. So there's a lot of components, I think, that would go into an ideal day of health. I think a lot of these things are easier to incorporate once you start doing them. And you don't do them by rote, but simple breathing exercises take less than 5 minutes, and they make an enormous impact on stress response. So there are so many areas we could talk about that I think will go into an ideal day for it. I'd say what I tell my daughters every day is, do something hard every day. Pick something that's going to be a challenge every day. That's also something we're designed to do, is we're designed to find something challenging, and not that we're always going to be successful with all of it, but something challenging should happen each day.
I think that's a great note to end on. I would actually love to have you come back on and talk about some of the resistance exercises that you touched on there, and maybe a little bit more on the breathing. You're an encyclopedia of knowledge, of circadian knowledge, and it's very inspiring that you're the surgeon without the scalpel per se. I know you're still doing some surgeries, but you're going to revolutionize the whole industry and hopefully save, in the United States, maybe billions of dollars in healthcare if people could embrace some of these strategies. So I really congratulate you for stepping outside of the box and embracing this new world of circadian biology and helping so many people along the way. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and I would love to have you back on the show.
Oh, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you, and good luck with your tennis today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Circadian Reboot. If you're looking to improve your sleep, align with your natural rhythms, and enhance your overall health, please visit my website, www.pamkilleen.com, for resources, practical tips, and guidance on optimizing your circadian habits. Thanks again for tuning in, and see you next time. The information in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. We are not licensed healthcare providers, and our content is not a substitute for professional medical diagnosis, advice, or treatment. For personalized health guidance, or if you have specific medical concerns, please consult a qualified medical professional. They can assess your individual health needs and offer recommendations tailored to you. By listening to this podcast, you agree to this disclaimer. We assume no responsibility or liability for actions taken based on the information provided here.